and welcome to this afternoon's session. By your mere appearance and filling the room, we see that this is a subject matter that's going to have a big impact. And we had just learned about it ourselves about 2 weeks ago or so, when our first speaker here this session, Sandy Weaver, who is the Youth Program Compliance Officer for Penn State University, called me and said, "Did you hear about this?" And I said, "What? No." And as she made calls around the state, she did also discover that no one else knew about this. And so she's going to tell us what she has learned and from her perspective. And what we're trying to work out here via Zoom is our contact with the Department of Human Services, Office of Children, Youth, and Families, Treasurer Gallagher, who, the way this is planned, that she'll be able to hear us. And Sandy is not going to speak for the state, but she might be able to answer some questions or clarify things, but also hear the things that we may have to say. She is not yet on the line, so we may have some work to do when she does connect. That feedback was a surprise, so we'll see how that works. So Sandy will speak first, and Treasurer, and then wrapping up our hour is Steve Stroman, who is PRPS's public policy advocate on a contract basis. His experience is 10 years as policy director for Penn Future, leading statewide advocacy group, environmental, energy, and conservation issues. And he has been very helpful to our Government Affairs Committee in shepherding our path with DHS on our preschool recreation issue and House Bill 1831. But he'll address that a little bit, but also how this new issue of provisional hiring may enter into our own response to the hearing in those days. So we're going to ask them to come to this podium so that the microphone picks everything up, so that, because it is being recorded, so we can share with other members who are not able to be here today, which means if somebody gets a question, you might repeat it first before answering it, so that those listening to the audio later would be able to keep track. So Sandy has become the de facto expert in the state on this issue because no one else knows. So we asked her if she would come, and she graciously accepted to share what she knows about it so that we can, in turn, spread the word and act on it as appropriate for ourselves. So thank you very much, Sandy, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, when I'm being called an expert, it kind of makes me go, ooh, I'm not sure if I am, but I did actually, discover this. But one of the things that people always wonder why Penn State has an interest in these things, but people don't realize that Penn State across the state of Pennsylvania works with more than 220,000 children a year. That's many more children than we have undergrad and graduate students. Most of those come from 4-H, but another 120,000 come from youth programs that we have, whether it's a traditional camp out in the woods, we have environmental centers, we have academic camps, we have recreation camps. And so part of my role at Penn State, overseeing compliance, is to make sure that we are always following the law. And the one law that really is set in stone with us is the criminal background clearances that all of our staff need to have in order to work in our youth programs. And the law that, I carry it around in a binder all the time is my, Title 23, Chapter 63, and always have it and always try to keep up with what we're doing. And so in that, that the definition of a program, activity, or service, and it talks about all the different types of camps, what I think it includes all of us and the types of the camps that we do. And so I think it was early August, I had a new hire and I got onto the legislative site and said, I'm going to show you how I periodically get on here and look to see if there's anything going on that I should pay attention to. And we found House Bill 235, and I said, oh, we'll look at this one. And that House bill, the memo was witnessing consent to adoption by incarcerated parents. But I noticed that then after the memo, there was something in there about background clearances and provisional hiring, and I was like, oh, I need to look at this. So again, I just found it by accident in August. Reached out to our government affairs, realized it was no longer a bill, but it had actually been signed. This, the timeline for this was, it was under that bill, and within 5 days, the end of June and into July, the bill got amended, it was reviewed and approved, and then signed by the governor. 5 days. So I was like, oh, well, this is maybe why we didn't hear about it. Now, I know Treasurer's going to join, and I think she can explain that. I know that from that perspective and what I've heard, there's reasons why they needed to change some things. But I knew immediately that this was going to have an impact. Because up until, and it goes into effect December 31st. But up until this new law goes into effect, I think most of us are aware in the law there is a provisional hiring period. If we hire people who their clearances are not back by the time they start, we're allowed to provisionally hire them, which means they have to be with a cleared person, they have to sign the waiver, they have to be in the immediate vicinity. And while we do not hire provisionally, very often at Penn State, our policy even says we only use it in emergency situations. We do use it. You probably run into situations like us that, 2 days before your camp is going to start, your program is going to start, somebody's sick, somebody backs out, somebody, and then you're out of what we have ratios. We follow the American Camp Association ratios. While we're not licensed, we still think that that's important to have ratios. We allow no one-on-one, even if they are cleared. So we knew that if this provisional hire went away, there could be an opportunity for us to be running a program where we're not appropriately staffed, and that would impact the safety of the child. So the change in the law is under 6344M. What it is, and what it says is now there is no longer the opportunity to provisional hire unless you are a child care center, daycare, home center licensed, and that you can provisionally hire as long as you get a waiver from the state. So basically the language change and what we saw was, because we run programs, activities, and services, and we hire people who have direct care, that unless they have their 3 clearances back before the first day of the program, they cannot work in our program. So that, in a nutshell, is the change, and it was one little word from may to may not, and then the exception for child care centers. At the same time, well, I know the description talked about up to 5 clearances. Those 5 clearances, though it's my understanding, impact licensed child care centers. There's 2 additional clearances licensed child care centers may need to get. It's our understanding that that does not impact our programs, which is the National Sex Offender Registry, and then if somebody's lived out of state the last 5 years, they have to get a state-to-state check. So, but that's for licensed child care centers as far as I know. So, we have been, it was in August when I found that. There have been a lot of conversations going on, just trying to figure out, does this really apply to us, does it not? With the help of individuals from Penn State's Government Affairs, we were able to talk to some people in Harrisburg about this and really just talk through, what are the options? Actually, there are no, right now, the way the law is written, I don't think there's any options for us. So we've had to really think about how this law is going to impact. We run programs year-round. We have some programs starting in January. For us, we hire a lot of students. and it's last minute, you know, to get their clearances. We already know clearances take a little while to come in. We really try to minimize that by backing up our hiring process by 3 months. But again, that one, even if it's 1 or 2 provisional hires, if we need it, we need it. So that's where we are at this point. But I thought, you know, as Tim said, I thought it was important. I wasn't sure. You know, am I the only one who's seeing this? Am I the only one who's reading this? Has anybody else seen this? Does anybody else know? It was a little crazy making for me at first. I thought, well, maybe I'm not reading this right. But it turns out that I think it was intended, and this is where we are now. And the law does as of December 31st. So I think by the looks in the room of faces, I think everybody's feeling the same way I am, that this is going to have an impact on our programs, a major impact. So that's what I have for announcing it. Yeah.
What haven't done yet in having this week?
Oh, so, well, reaching out to, you know, obviously reaching out to Tim, and it was timely that this meeting was happening because we thought it was important that this group, that you each hear about this and that you can go back to within your own municipalities, right, and talk to people that you need to talk to. And I also, I'm also a member of the American Camp Association, and I sit on their National Standards Commission. It's their accreditation body. And so I know that the American Camp Association has a Keystone region that covers Pennsylvania. And so, of course, I had contacts there. So I did reach out to them and ask them if they knew about this. And there were crickets. They did not know about it either. And so I think there's some movement on that side as far as educating their members about this. And I think that, you know, I'm not sure, but I think, you know, we've had some conversations with people from the state, and I believe at this time that our conversations actually happening, you know, I'm not a political person, so I don't know, in the legislature, in the legislation, and people in Harrisburg talking about this to see if there's something, you know, is there going to be an edit to the law? Is there not? But we need to know soon because this is coming really quickly. So, yeah.
So I mean, so you're thinking that the 2 extra checks that you mentioned, it's only, so a lot of us are worried about that.
Yeah,
Already,
yeah.
Like, we're already doing 3 checks on
Yeah.
students, like, what else is
Right.
there?
So from my perspective, and I think is Treasurer going to be getting on
I just got an email.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have seen that language in bulletins that are coming out from OCDEL, so the Office of Development, Early Child Learning, that's happening in our child care centers. And Penn State does have 2 licensed child care centers, so we know that that is the rule. It doesn't show up in the new law where it talks about the clearances that are needed in general for these programs. They haven't changed that in the law. So.
I mean, you get around this, or you just, when you advertise for a job, or you just basically say, to apply for this job, you must come with these already to hopefully get around this whole, like, we all run into it, last minute, you know, we have to hire someone 3 days before our program starts.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of standard. I mean,
Yeah.
hiring them 7 months ahead of time doesn't really mean that when it comes to it, they're not going to find another job. It's just getting longer to find another job.
Exactly.
So,
I think we.
the standard that you must come with these,
Well,
that is being the new.
Well, I think that, I can't speak for sure, but I do think that some of the programs that we do hire for, it is in the position description that you need the clearances. But, you know, that we have, what you said, we've backed up our hiring process, to try to make sure. We are just in the process right now of trying to figure out how are we going to make sure that this happens. You know, that the Pennsylvania State Police, you know, they can give you the ability to run that. You could run that for them, the same with the tokens and the child abuse clearance. So there's a little more control over that from an agency organization standpoint. Even if you bring people in and have them sit down and apply for their FBI. They have to schedule an appointment. You have no control over that. These people have to go themselves to go get printed. And I think that's the wild card is that, let's see.
In motor vehicle, a lot of us belong to insurance trucks that run with that check.
Mhm.
We can have that turned around in a day, a lot of times.
Right.
The FBI is the wild card, like 3 months.
Right.
We get into the summer hiring.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And I'm assuming it's really just Pennsylvania.
Well, I'm not sure about why Octel had to change this, and again, it may or may not be a national thing, I'm not sure, but for Pennsylvania, it is definitely for us. It is a challenge. So we are in the same stage of what are we going to do? I know that you can get codes for the FBI, and we have, we brought in a whole bunch of students and sat them down at computers and everything, and the codes for the FBI, but they still have to go get printed themselves. The other thing for us is that, if you remember when the law was changed 5 or 6 years, I guess it was about over 5 years, is that's when the state said there was a larger population of people. The larger population of people that needed to get these clearances, and that they're good for every 5 years. So that whole group of people that needed those clearances 5 years ago, and I know from Penn State it's a lot of people, starting right now is the recertification process. So not only do you have all new employees needing to get these and have them back before they can start work, across the state of Pennsylvania, I don't know how many people are going to be going to get recertified. We have talked to the Identigo, the regional branch of Identigo, and talked to them about, is there anything that they are going to do to open up more fingerprint sites or to extend their hours, because it's a challenge to get an appointment. Hi, Treasurer Sandy Weaver. Thanks for...
Hi, Sandy.
Thanks. So I was just giving them a background, Treasurer, of, how this impacts Penn State and what we are trying to do to be knowledgeable of what we need to do to move forward. But I think now, this might be a good time for you to talk about how this came about, and I think there's some questions in the room.
So I think where I'll start is to give a little background on how we got to Act 47 here in Pennsylvania. So initially, we knew as a Commonwealth that we were one of the few places that allowed agencies or organizations to do what we've always called the provisional hires. Many other places did not do that. It was either, you had your required clearances in hand to start, or you waited to get them to start. So we were kind of unique in that way for a very long time. With that, of course, with anything, comes issues and concerns as we go. And two of the main issues and concerns that occurred or were occurring and brought to our attention over the years as it pertains to provisional hiring was that the way the law was written and the way the provisional hire was to work is that when a person was provisionally hired, they were not to be alone with children. So they were not to be put in ratio. They were not to be a full-fledged staff until all of their clearances were obtained and in hand. And we know, unfortunately, all too often that did not occur. So we had individuals who did not have all their clearance requirements in hand, and they started working alone with kids, and they started being full permanent staff members, or in ratio, as some people called it, before they were ready or before, we were able to get the required documentation. So that was always a definite concern. One of the other things that we were seeing from a licensing perspective was that often a person was done as a provisional hire, And most agencies or organizations would require the individual to bring in some type of proof. So usually it was basically a receipt that they had gone to Cogent back a number of years ago, or now Identigo and had done their fingerprinting and were just waiting for the clearances to arrive. So those most often would go in the individual's file, but now we would come in, whoever we were, whether it was a licensing unit, whether it was the governor's office, whoever was coming in to oversee and to review files, was finding that nobody had ever gone back to actually obtain the clearance results from the individual. So often when we open the files, we would see their receipt that they had gone and done it, 5-6 months ago, but the results of the clearance were not there. And, many times we knew this, it wasn't to be in malice, and it wasn't to be to skirt around the system. They had merely forgotten, and especially if they've done mass hirings, it was getting a little too easy to forget to follow up with all the individuals and make sure their files were updated. So that's where we were at a state level, and two of the major concerns that would occur when we were talking about hiring individuals on a provisional basis. So there was a number of discussions on that, and during such time, another thing had occurred, and that was the federal government had given us information on what we call our Family First initiative. And Family First is a federal initiative that was created, and like many, it was offered out to the states saying, here's this initiative, here's money that goes along with this initiative, and here are the regulations, the stipulations, the rules, so to speak, that you would have to go by as a state if you wanted to be part of the Family First initiative, and then, of course, receive any funding that goes with it. And part of the Family First initiative spoke to the few states or commonwealths that did provisional hires. And Family First had said to us that they wanted to really draw down the scope or the number of folks that were allowed to provisionally hire. So we spent a good year, I say we, the state, spent at least a good year, probably almost two, going through all of the requirements of Family First, and one of many discussions was on this provisional hire piece and how we would handle that. So as it was discussed, and we started looking at the small populations, the groups that they said could or would not be able to provisionally hire, it became very confusing, and we struggled with the lack of consistency, and we struggled with, well, why could some do provisional hires but others couldn't, and what made the difference, and how is that fair, and how can we implement this across the state if there's no consistency? So at that point, it was decided that if we were going to take part in Family First, which again meant that we would need to take on all the rules and regulations, that we would have to make a change to provisional hires. So taking into account some of the concerns we had previously, taking into account the Family First requirements, taking into account our wanting and needing to be consistent and trying to be fair on who would be able and who cannot provisionally hire, it was decided at the higher levels that provisional hires would be removed to make it fair and consistent across the board. And then that's where we have Act 47 come into play. This was a discussion that we had for some time, and as many things around budget time, when we're trying to get an a number of different things through and completed, you tend to find our bill around the budget having a number of different categories or topic areas kind of pushed in one. And that's what happened with Act 47. That's where the provisional hire information was placed, stating that provisional hiring would be removed as of December 31st, 2019, giving agencies and organizations time to change any protocols and to, for those people that may already be on a provisional hiring status, to get the clearances and things that they needed. So that's where I start to give you some background on how we got to where we are. Before I field any questions, let me just give you an update as to where we are, because I think you'll find this very helpful, and for a lot of you, it may allow you to breathe a bit of sigh of relief. So we had not formally, and when I say formally, it hadn't gone out yet on the DHS website. It had not gone out on the Office of Children and Youth website. We hadn't necessarily posted anything as of yet on our major listservs about provisional hire being removed. But of course, it was getting out by word of mouth, and our Office of Child Development and Early Learning, OCDEL, had gotten a blast out to their licensed individuals explaining to them that they could no longer do a provisional hire. But as of the way Act 47 is written, licensed child care facilities could request a waiver. But they would have to request a waiver for each person that they would want to provisionally hire. So word had started getting around, which was good, that the provisional hiring change. We also at that point had a number of discussions with a number of agencies and organizations who came to us with some concerns and informing us as the Commonwealth, DHS, on how that really could negatively impact the work that was going to be done and the various programs, just by the nature of how hiring occurs, when hiring occurs, and not being able to have that small period of time to wait for an individual to obtain their FBI clearance. So we heard that. We had taken that back to the legislators, and they were interested and did listen to the concerns, and we requested a legislative review, which is currently occurring. So as of today, 11/20 at 1:30, Act 47 is continuing as written, meaning that as of right now, you will no longer be allowed to provisionally hire from December 31st, 2019. But there has been some further discussions, and a legislative change has been requested. And I am, at this point, 99.9% certain that a legislative change will occur. They were hoping to have that change voted upon this week. Unfortunately, they were not able to come to a complete decision on how the new process and rules would look. So we are now hoping that they will be able to vote on the change next week, and we'll be able to get that information out to you as soon as there was a number of potential changes that could be made, and until the voting is done and the actual verbiage is out, we won't be sure exactly what was approved. But so in saying that, the provisional hires will not be returned fully, meaning we will not go back to where we were previously, but we also know that it won't be taken away completely as of December 31st. So we know it will meet a middle ground. I'm just not exactly sure what that middle ground might look like. But again, we're hoping to get that next week, and then we'll be placing that out on our Department of Human Services website, our Keep Kids Safe website, and we'll be working with our communications team to do different listservs and get that information out as quickly and as effectively as possible.
Treasurer, thank you very much. This is Tim Hurd.
Hi.
We have a number of questions while we still have your ear. And,
oh, sure, absolutely.
And Sandy, she has some too. But good to hear that there is some movement on this, but we would like to know what they are thinking, what it's going to look like when it gets voted on, because we were ambushed on this the first time, not knowing anything until after it happened, and it'd be great if we could know what the considerations are before a vote is taken, so that we could react as well if necessary.
So I would love to be able to tell you what they are, but I have not been. Once it gets past a certain level, then it's solely between the legislative review or legislative office and the powers to be, so to say. So I wouldn't be able to, and I wouldn't feel comfortable telling you what it's going to look like. What I can tell you to try to offer just a glimmer of things that have been discussed. So what I will say in this is I'm only giving you one of the number of things that were discussed just to give you an idea of the way they are thinking. But please don't go to your legislators and say this isn't going to work, or you know what I mean, because I would hate for us to respond and start to, be contacting them on something that they may no longer even be thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we don't want to second guess something that we don't know anything about.
So that's all I ask. It's just, so I don't mind giving you a glimpse of something that was discussed. I think that's only fair. But again, I just ask that that the folks I'm speaking with don't take that as what they're doing. I just want to give you an idea or a thought about some of the many discussions that were happening.
Yes, and I assure you everybody here is hanging on every word you're saying. So Andy has a couple of questions, though.
Okay.
Are you going to share what's being discussed?
Well, so let me give you an example. Again, a mere example of, because I was cut out of the discussions last week, and I mean that in the sense of they come to us, they ask us programmatically how that would look from the state end, and what we would need to do at our end to make different things happen. And then, of course, they take that data and they go back and convene. So I haven't had any updates since then. One of the options they had at one point discussed was allowing everyone potentially to request waivers. So rather than just allowing licensed daycare to request waivers to do provisional hires, the thought was, well, what if we allowed everyone to request waivers? So that was one example of what they were thinking. Again, though, we knew we did a whole pros and cons list on that, and they took that back with them, so I don't know where they landed, but that would give you one good example of where they were trying to kind of find that middle ground.
Thanks, Treasurer. This is Sandy. I do have a follow-up question.
Sure.
You mentioned about that they gave 6 months for the law, so people had time to prepare for it. But as you can hear, people here didn't know about it, so we are trying to prepare. But my question is, we hire people year-round because we have programs year-round. So what
Sure.
if we have a youth program that's going to start in November, and we are hiring that person, and their 3 clearances are not back yet? So we could still provisionally hire them, but if the program's going into January or into February, what would we do with that person? Would they be grandfathered in under the old law? And would be, or is there a hard stop for anyone without clearances as of January 1?
As of right now, there is a hard stop as of January 1. So if the person does not have their clearances, they cannot work. Now, I think what we're seeing in the discussions we're having is the sense that you don't have to stop the hiring process, of course, but they cannot be with kids until those clearances are in hand.
Okay, so we would be in a situation, we never allow one-on-one contact, but we could be in a situation where we would have to remove that person and then therefore have less adults in the room.
Right.
And so that,
right.
For me, that might feel like I'm putting kids at risk because they may not have enough eyes on them.
Right,
So
right. And we did have,
a hard stop.
it is a hard stop at this point. Now, I will tell you, one of the other discussion pieces that came up was just that, was the fact that having this hard stop as of January 1st, but then removing provisional hiring as a whole, could potentially, and in many cases for programs like yours, creates a staffing or a ratio issue. So that's definitely seen, and that's definitely also being discussed when they're trying to meet that middle ground of, okay, how can we make it so that folks are hearing us and that trying to ensure the best we can that, you know, if we were to give back any form of provisional hiring, how could we do it in a safe way? And, you know, so we didn't have all these lapses in these issues that I was talking about that we had in the past, but also not messing up ratios and hiring practices and in some cases potentially closing camp programs and things, because we wouldn't want that to happen either.
So a follow-up question then to the waiver, because I know that, and I know you were saying hypothetically speaking, maybe giving.
Yes, I apologize, but I learned many years ago not to even guess, because the couple times I did, what then came out was completely different than where I thought we were headed.
So my question to that is that, so we know the waiver will be allowed in licensed child care centers, but as of today, because we do have 2 licensed child care centers, we're not even sure of what the process is to get a waiver. And so so that's one thing, is if the waiver's, you know, given, we don't even know what that looks like. But then my other question is would that waiver be given on an individual hiring basis, or would that be an institutional waiver?
No, individual hiring basis. Yes, so very clear on that. So,
So
now,
then, hypothetically speaking then, just so people can plan hypothetically.
Sure. Well,
it's on an individual basis, and even this is being discussed for our child care centers.
Sure.
What is the projected timeline for the turnaround of those waivers? Because we know of some of the programs where people come to work our programs from out of state or out of the country, and the fingerprint seems to be the clearance that is the one then that would be backed up. And so it's really important to understand the timeline, and we can take out our programs, just looking at child care centers, if that were to happen. What is the turnaround time for a waiver?
So I'll step back to 2 questions previous. So as of today, again, I'm going to go back and speak to you as of today, realizing there will be changes coming, but so that you folks can prepare like kind of where we are today. When we're talking about the licensed child care centers, that waiver process is being created right now. I've been working with the Office of Child Development and Early Learning, OCDEL for those that are licensed. They are creating that waiver process as we speak for the licensed child care. And with that, they will be sending something out, and very clearly with the waiver instructions and the waiver itself, as well as where to submit the waiver and so on. So they will send that out in a blast the way they normally do, but they are feverishly working on that. So it should be coming out. Their goal was to get it out as quickly as possible so people had it, obviously, before December 31st. So the Office of Child Development and Early Learning will be doing those waivers, and that is being worked on and will come out to all the licensed facilities. So you will have that.
Okay.
And it will be on an individual hiring basis. So for the individual, not an overarching provisional hire for the institution or agency. So when we're talking about waivers, and I can't speak to the Office of Child Development and Early Learning because theirs may be a little different. What I can speak to is the Department of Human Services. So basically, I can speak to everyone else that is not licensed by OCDEL. Our waiver process is currently 90 days. So for example, if an agency placed in a waiver and it wasn't responded to in some way, and we weren't in the midst of working with the agency or organization on something, within 90 days, then they're just approved.
So, so you're saying we would have to wait to bring that person in for 90, potentially?
Oh, I would hope not. I would hope not. That's just our longest length of time.
Okay.
So when we discussed the waiver option, and again, that's why I was so set on letting you know that this may not be the one. It was just an example of what we discussed. One of the issues that came up with the waiver was timing and time frames and how to make sure we would adequately get them back to the agencies and organizations in a timely manner, because if you're waiting 90 days, your camp could be here and done by the time we'd even get the waiver.
At Penn State, that's the summer, and so we start having camps in the middle of June, and we're done by the middle of August. So there's
absolutely.
Of our members as well, yes.
So
right, yeah, I completely understand.
Okay, and one final question, and then I'll ask it. Has there been consideration taken that this law is being, it's effective January 1, December 31st, at the same time where the 5-year expiration time frame is coming up from when the old law was passed, and so we have people needing to get recertified across the state, and will that impact the return of the FBI?
So I don't necessarily know. It doesn't appear, and I may be incorrect, but just in discussions, it does not appear that the 5-year time frame was taken into account when Act 47 was passed. I don't believe, it didn't appear that anyone was thinking that way as far as time frames. Now, we are being told through Identigo and Edemia, who of course we hold the contract with, as well as the Pennsylvania State Police, because there are liaisons for our FBI and fingerprints, that is to not impact or not negatively impact the time frames for receiving your FBI fingerprint clearances back.
Isn't there already a delay in that now? And if you throw another 100,000 people in the system in April and May, we have trouble believing that would be.
I completely understand. We do realize that realistically, you're waiting, what, probably 3 to 5 weeks? Is that the consensus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or more.
Yeah. Or more. Yeah. I think, I believe that part of additional discussions this week was there was originally our discussions on time frames. I think folks that don't work with the clearances, they were going off of an expected protocol. They were going off of, in an ideal world, you know, you would get them back within 14 days. So we were very, very clear to make sure in our discussions that one of the other things to please take into account is that realistically we're not receiving clearances, and it's usually more 3 to 5 weeks, if not a little bit longer. So we were clear in that, yeah.
Oh, and I know there are more questions. I'm going to say, write your questions down and leave them with us in the back that we can submit and see what we can find out and push out some further information as it becomes available, because apparently things are happening and that may be a good thing. And we want, but the House recesses, I think they've canceled. Steve will mention that there. So, Treasurer, thank you very much for joining us. It's been very enlightening, and we appreciate it greatly.
Thank you.
All right, Treasurer, I think we can leave us, and
wonderful. Yes, I apologize. Yes, I apologize I couldn't be more clear, but hopefully I'll be able to give you more information here in the next week.
And what we hope in the future, too, is that when there are new provisions being considered, that some of the practitioners who this would impact greatly might have some input before it becomes law, and perhaps we can avoid this another time. So, thank you again very much.
Completely understood. Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye.